Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is Mary Crawford, and I'm the chair of the TJ Ryan Foundation, who is co-hosting this event with the Australian Republican Movement. So I'd like to welcome you all this morning, and we have a fantastic array of speakers, our guest speaker Peter Fitzsimons, and our wonderful panel to whom I'll introduce you later. So a very big welcome, and without further ado, I'd like to ask Uncle Bob Anderson to acknowledge our traditional owners and welcome us. Thank you.
Yura, going in an army, 2G maybe Rano, going in an army. Welcome to this place, Aboriginal land, land of the Turrbal people, land of the Jagera people. I have bloodline connections to country, which allows me to give that welcome. I'm extremely pleased to, again, welcome everybody. I've got a good connection with the TJ Ryan Foundation, and my connection with TJ Ryan goes back to my school days when I was a schoolboy, and I used to see his statue at the corner of Queen's Park, TJ Ryan, and it always calls to mind two other TJs in my lifetime. There was TJ Smith, the great horse trainer, and my brother Tom Anderson, TJ. So all those family connections are quite good. So I'm pleased, as I say, to be here. I was born in Meganton, which is the language name for Brisbane, 82 years ago. And part of my growing up experience was when I lived with my Aboriginal grandmother on Minjalba, which is the language name for Stradbroke Island, at the 1 mile where the Aboriginal community lived. And I lived with my grandmother 82 years ago. I do remember the place quite well. It was a corrugated iron, galvanised iron walls and ceiling. That was the normal housing arrangements over the island. So all those things are very important to it. They identify who we are, what we're about, and I also pay respects to Maiwar, the river. And rivers are messengers. The flotsam that comes and goes on the tides indicates what's happening further down and what's happening upstream. So all those natural things that are important to Aboriginal people to read the signs. We also get from Bigi, the sun, who warms the earth and gives life to all creatures. Gellin, the moon, and Milligan, the star, are all part of the language names that associate with place. And in Aboriginal society, everyone has a place. There's a place for everybody. That's part of the structures of Aboriginal society. And I'm sure we can learn a lot from that with the divisions we have. And at times I listen to some of the parliamentary debates down in the House of our State House of Parliament. You swear they're all enemies, but they all come from the same generations of people in the same language groups. So again, I'm pleased to be here to participate in the discussions today, and we're talking about what's the thing for today?
Remarking the Republic.
Remarking the Republic. Well, my own experience. That's right. Well, in regards to the Republic, on both sides of my family, on my daddy's side and his mother's side and his grandfather's side, I had family connections, and my grandmother was born at Cloners, a little place in Ireland, in County Monaghan, and another family branch line up in County Sligo. So that ties me into those connections with the rebellious nature of the Irish. And I like to say too, in my younger days when I used to attend the Broadway picture show at Wollongabba, they're all sitting there in the seats waiting for it to commence, and the commencement was the lights would be dimmed, the curtains would open, and the band would strike out God Save the Queen. And the big picture of the royal family was there before you. Well, because of my Irish background, my dad forbade us to speak. You don't stand up to the Queen of England. So perhaps that my rebellious nature was started, and that to question and disobey, if you like. So all those things are important to us, and our own personality. You're all travellers, migrants to this land, asylum seekers perhaps. So it's important to, when you identify with country, that it's important. And what I have done, I have a family branch line in Cornwall, Scotland and Ireland, and I've visited all those places and walked in the footsteps of my ancestors that have come from there, and that strengthens my identity as who I am. So again, all of those things, I'm pleased to be here, and as I said, as a Republican. In fact, when my daddy passed away, he's buried in the cemetery at Dutton Park on his marker, I made the point, I'm a Republican. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Uncle Bob. I'd now like to call on Andrew Fraser, who's the Queensland convener for the Australian Republican Movement, to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mary, and welcome, and thanks very much for coming along, Republicans and all those interested in a republic. It's appropriate I too acknowledge we're on the grounds of the Turrbal and the Jagera people here beside the Brisbane River, or Mayware as the Jagera and Turrbal people referred to it. It's interesting, you look out on the river and it's now a barrier almost between north and south and used for the city cats. For the Turrbal and the Jagera people, it was also a source of food. It was very rich in fishing, fish, crayfish, prawns, all of those were basically a source of life out there. Another interesting point, the patterns of settlement under European settlement, mostly around here, the CBD, the bigger numbers were actually more upriver, around the Regatta Hotel and Wesley Hospital. I mentioned some of this past, this history. Our guest speaker is a historian, is a man who understands the past in order to understand the future. But that's been 250, that's, I guess, a bit of a look at what life in Brisbane was like 250 years ago. Hopefully it won't be 250 years before we can transition our constitutional arrangements to a republic. I'll be very short just about the Queensland branch of the Republic movement. We're very much a grassroots movement. We're on the ground. We go out to places such as Morayfield. Martin, who's sitting here, has done the hard yards there at Paneri, some of those ethnic festivals. We're going out and trying to talk to people and have conversations on the ground. This is hard work. There's an awful lot of them. Sometimes, especially, and a lot of you in this room have a political background, you know those areas on the edge of city. They don't like politics, they don't like politicians. Sitting there having those conversations is hard work. We're out there doing that. It's interesting, I've just been to the ACTU conference where one former politician who, they always want to give you the benefit of their wisdom, and he says, what sort of personalities are you using to promote the Republic? I see Mal Meninga and Susie O'Neill having a cup of tea. What do you think? And so to say, well, look, we're kind of a long way from that. we're just out there talking to people. But look, Queensland's going to be a tough ask. You may have forgotten the nightmare, but I'll bring up 1999. Queensland had the lowest vote of any state, 37.5% yes, 62.5% no. A lot's changed in the 20 years since then. We now basically have 3 million people on the electoral roll instead of 2 million, what we had then. How can I diplomatically put this? A lot of people who were eligible to vote 20 years ago are no longer eligible to vote. At the same time, there's been a whole group of people who are eligible to vote, and they're coming through very nicely. We have a lot of young people. Ella, I believe, was 2 days old at the time of the last vote. Yes, so we have some historical continuity. But look, we're getting out there. We're trying to talk to people, and I think there's a lot of direction, a lot of energy, a lot of passion, a lot of focus. A lot of that's come about since Peter has been heading up the Republic movement. I think we've got some profile. We have an awful long way to go. There's no question about that. But I think if we keep on digging there, we keep on working hard, we have events such as this one where we can work out the details. This is what we're about today. But let's not lose sight of this Australian independence. That's really what we're about. It's an independent Australia, completely free from Great Britain. I could go on, but suffice to say, there's the man who's got the Republic going. It's a great pleasure, Peter Fitzsimons.
So, thank you, Andrew, and thank you all for coming. And I just want to begin thanking the TJ Ryan Foundation, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, past, present, and emerging. Great to be here. I want to say just very quickly about Andrew Fraser. It's fantastic, Andrew, the energy that you put in here. I think it's fair to say of all of our state divisions, this is the one that is really moving, really going hard. Don't panic, I'm not nearly as rough as I look, and I do want to be able to do justice to the occasion. I might say one of the roles that I feel is I'm the presiding Pro-Chancellor at Sydney University, and I have something of a stump speech that I make as I hand out the degrees and masters and PhDs. And one of the lines is, look, I've got all these professors behind me, and I want to say congratulations to all of you up the front that have just got PhDs and masters and HDs and distinctions, but you're not my people. My people are you poor bastards up the back that just scratch through by the hairs of your chinny chin chin, because that was me at university. I was not remotely academic, and I take a similar approach with the Republic movement. We absolutely need the academics with us. We absolutely need the brain power, intellectual cut through of academics. For what it's worth, when talking on the Republic, I try to use the language of wider Australia. I try to take it down from esoteric fields to put it in the language that everybody's with. I have to be careful when I do that. When I started as chair of the Republic movement nearly 3 years ago, my wife was present for my first interview. We were driving back from Thredbo, and I did an interview with Radio National and went for 20 minutes, and I put the phone down and I said, I think that went really well. And she said, darling, I'd like to give you a bit of advice. I said, what's that? She said, if you're going to do this role and do it properly, don't play your natural game. I said, what do you mean by that? She said, don't be a loud dickhead. And I try. I really try, with mixed success, because when I do speak about the Republic and the idea of Australia being a republic, it does grip me by the throat. I am overwhelmed by the case for the Republic, and I do get deeply frustrated with those who say we can't, we won't, we shouldn't, it's not safe, we need to hold on to England. For my stump speech around the country, I warm to the theme. Basically, my major theme is, my starting point is, our selling point is a really easy one. We maintain the thing that unites us all, minimalists, direct electionists, all Republicans everywhere, we maintain that in the 21st century, Australia can do better than to find our head of state from a family of English aristocrats living in a palace in London. Hashtag for Christ's sake. And so, I mean, it's an easy selling point because it is something that is patently obvious. It is ridiculous. It is embarrassing. It is undignified to think that we can do no better, that we need to still have the English infrastructure. The hallmarks of a colony are those places that have a political infrastructure that extends beyond their border. It's fine for a colony to have a ruler reigning over them from well across the seas. It is not fine for a sovereign nation. How do we get against this simple premise that we can do better? There are many, as I say, who say we can't, we won't, we shouldn't. And those netty naysayers and nervous Nellies have been with Australia through our history, and at every step forward of progress, of independence, of being our own people, they have rushed forward and they have been ignored, and Australia has proceeded anyway. And I often cite 1890s Australia had the worst drought since the establishment of the colony, the worst depression to that point. Somehow the 6 colonies still managed to come together to form a country against all of those who said we can't, we won't, we shouldn't, it's not safe. The idea was floated late 1901, let's have a flag of our own instead of the Union Jack. There was an absolute outcry. It was done anyway. And I might say on the subject of the Republic, the Australian Republic movement has absolutely no view whatsoever on the flag. We have no position on it whatsoever. but by God, I do. And I'm also on the board of Ozflag, which basically says we should have a flag of our own, and I frequently quote the line, and I love it, from Jerry Seinfeld when he came to Australia in the year 2000, and he said, "I love your flag, Great Britain at night." But it is worth noting, when that idea was put up to have a flag of our own, no, absolutely not. Why can't we just stay with the Union Jack? We are Great Britain in the South Seas, let's stay with that. As I say, it was done anyway. And it's interesting, when the diggers marched away to World War I, Andrew Fisher, that is what he said. He said, "We will fight for Great Britain to the last man and the last shilling." And by God, we nearly did. 60,000 dead diggers later, we were close to the last man. It was extraordinary. But that was the view of Australia at that time. We were the loyal sons and daughters of Great Britain. That is who we are. In the course, there's a few brilliant books been written recently on World War I. Matter of fact, I wrote them. And it is fascinating to look at the change of identity. The great Charles Bean, who went away, really, the great war correspondent, who really went away more British than the British, and had the idea that if the British officers would be better than Australian officers, and British soldiers would be better than Australian soldiers, and through the course of the war, changed his view, realised that we were more than capable of doing it on our own. I've just got a book out at the moment on Monash. It is extraordinary that General Sir John Monash, it wasn't until the 30th of May 1918 that Monash took over the Australian court. To that point, it had been led by English generals, but a particular English general, Sir William Burghley. And when the idea was first put forward, you know what? These are Australian diggers. We're going to have the Australian Corps. Do you think we should have maybe an Australian in charge? Absolute outcry. We can't do that. We need an English person in charge. It was done anyway, and Monash revolutionised warfare. Absolutely revolutionised the approach. Brought high intellect. A Melbourne Victorian engineer actually attacked it as a logistical problem. It changed everything. In the late 1920s, the idea again was put forward by Prime Minister James Scullin. Instead of having a British Governor-General in Australia, we are Australians, we're in Australia, this is an Australian government, what do you say we have an Australian Governor-General? Absolute outcry. The nervous Nellies and the Neddy naysayers rushed in force. Who was proposed was Sir Isaac Isaacs, great Chief Justice of Australia, and a Jewish man. And this was at a time of rampant anti-Semitism around the world, rising fast. 250,000 Australians signed a petition to King George to say we can't, we won't, we shouldn't, it's not safe. And the fascinating thing was, there was no strain of anti-Semitism in it. The problem was not that he was Jewish, the problem was he was Australian. And we can't have an Australian running the show as Governor-General. It was done anyway, it was a great success. When we get to the 1960s, most of the people in this room will remember how every stamp we ever put on every envelope had an image of the Queen of England, remarkably similar to the image of the Queen of England that was up on the Sunday school wall with that beautiful golden dress. I grew up with that at Peteridge Public. There was the Queen of England, and she was on the stamps and she was everywhere. The idea was proposed. We're in Australia. We're sending Australian letters in Australian envelopes with Australian stamps. What do you say we have some Australian images? Outcry. It was done anyway. The same process took place in New Zealand, where they moved from the Queen being on every stamp to having New Zealand images, the way we have Australian symbols. My dear friend Eric Rush, All Black winger, accompanied the All Blacks in 1992 to Buckingham Palace to be presented to the Queen of England. And he said as she came through the curtains, I was not sure whether to shake her by the hand or to lick her on the back of the head. You'll recall in the 1970s, again the proposal was put forward to move on from God Save the Queen, to have a anthem of our own. It turned out to be Advance Australia Fair. The Queenslanders, which is everybody here, I think, will correct me, but I think that Joe Bjelke-Petersen said absolutely under no circumstances passed legislation to say we will stay with God Save the Queen, and I think Queensland was like 10 years before they moved on to Advance Australia Fair. But again, think of the outcry against that idea of having an anthem of our own. It's weird. It's absolutely weird. I mean, for me, I would like to move on again, frankly, and go to I am, you are, we are Australians, which I think has a much more powerful resonance for us. But again, the Republic movement has no view on that. The point being, it was done anyway, and it was a great success. And the real hallmark was the Privy Council. Okay, so up until 1986, if you were not happy with the ruling of the High Court of Australia, you could appeal to English people, because they were much wiser than us, they knew much better than we would, so you could appeal to the Privy Council. And it was started by Gough, 1975, I think it finally went through 86, the Australia Act. I'm in the field of academics, and there'll be no doubt 10 stern notes saying I've got my dates wrong and the people wrong. But that's the guts of it. It was Gough that generated it and said we can do this on our own. Absolute outcry, it was done anyway. So that's where we're at in 2018. Andrew mentioned the 1999 referendum. Personally, I never say the 1999 referendum. I said that referendum last century, just way back there, last century. So where we're at now is we're moving, and we're moving fast, and we've come an extraordinary distance. And I know that there are a lot of people here who have been involved in the Republic movement for a long time. And I want to just, again, acknowledge those people that have been there most particularly through the grim years. And I think I could probably characterise the grim years as something like 1999, 3rd of November, starting on the election was on the 2nd of November from memory. So let's say that the winter years started from the 3rd of November, and they've gone pretty much through most of the next 2 decades. And we're now going through better times. But we would never be going through the better times we are now without the winter soldiers keeping the whole show on the road through those bitter winter years. But now it's extraordinary how far we've come. We're actually on the public agenda. We're making the front pages, frequently attack pieces on the front page of the Oz. So be it. We're on the agenda. We've got one half of the political equation locked in with Bill Shorten on the 29th of July last year, making the statement to before 950 Republicans at the Royal Exhibition Building said if his government is elected, he said, we will ask the Australian people a very simple question. Do you think that Australia should have an Australian as our head of state? As simple as that. I have been personally quietly lobbying. I think the question should be, do you think Australia should have an Australian as our head of state, or are you a miserable git? But it's a great thing that has been locked in, and we are absolutely bipartisan, tripartisan, quadripartisan, non-partisan. We have no view about any electoral party, and we would love the Prime Minister, the Liberal National Party, to match that commitment. It would be wonderful in this bickering age in which we find ourselves politically if we could come together on this and say, look, on all of this endless nonsense. When I launched my dear friend Joe Hockey's biography, I made a speech and it was very impassioned, and I said, I for one, and I think much of Australia, is tired of the mad march of Australian politics. Left, right, left, right, left, right, I'm left, you're right, I hate you, you hate. It is tedious. Absolutely tedious. Accusing right, left, and everything you see, everything that happens in the public domain, endlessly put through the left-right prism. It tears Australia apart. The Republic should be something well above left and right. It should be something that unites us as Australians, a great national project. What model do we want? This is one of the obstacles we have. Okay, so there are people that have very passionate views about the model that we should be having, and very broadly, there are two major models. One is the minimalist view, and one is the direct election view. I am very passionate for the minimalist view of how we should change, and I'll explain my view, and I'm very interested, my friend David Ewell will put the direct election view, and I really want to take notes, mental notes at least, as he speaks for direct election. But the essence of the model, the way it works now, as you know, the Prime Minister chooses the Governor-General, and then he asks the Queen of England for her tick of approval, which is to say that nearly 250 years after Captain Cook landed, 120 odd years after Federation, we still have the situation where the democratically elected leader of the Australian peasantry, that's us, is reduced to asking the unelected leader of the English aristocrats, is he all right with your unelected Englishness? What I, as the democratically elected leader of the Australian people, want to do. That's the way it works right now. What I would love as a minimalist change is just about everything stays the same. We remain the Commonwealth of Australia. The Governor-General is still called the Governor-General. Why? Because we all understand the role of the Governor-General. Well, we know the President has just landed at Air Force One and Clark Air Force Base and is on his way to the White House. None of that pageantry. Governor-General, is one of us and we understand the role. But what I would like to see change is one thing, that instead of the democratically elected leader sending a letter to an unelected English person far across the seas, he or she makes the same decision and then sends it down the hall to the Parliament of the people, seeking a 2/3 majority of joint session of Parliament to get their approval. And if there is no approval, if there is no blockage, then if there is a blockage, then the position devolves to the Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia until such time as it's removed, to oversee, to administer the Constitution and the government. Now, when Anne Toomey, Professor Anne Toomey, who lives 12 doors up from me, she is a minimalist as well, and I said, well, if you were to change the Constitution in that manner, how long would it take? And she said she could do it on a wet weekend, that it would not be that complex. And why I'm passionate for that is, my starting point is I'm passionate for the Republic. My next point is, I think we can get Australia to move 6 inches. I don't think we can get them to move 60 miles in the old money. So that if you were to say one of the big things that people say, and it drives me Burko as well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Okay? And basically saying the system works as it is. Well, you ideally, with the minimalist model, you bring those ones into the temple, saying the system is only changing a little. So we know that whole system works broadly. We just want to remove the indignity, the ludicrousness of involving England. So that is why I think the minimalist model will be the best option. I suspect that when it is put before the Australian people, the direct election model will be the one that probably will probably be the one preferred by the Australian people. We will see. I think we need to have a very strong debate. But what I really think we need as a commitment is to look to the spectre, the horror of what happened in 1999, where Republicans were divided against themselves and the House fell. And all of us make a public commitment, and I make the commitment to you, Dave, that if the people, in their wisdom, democratically say they would prefer to have the direct election model, fantastic. It works well in Ireland, and we need all people that are minimalists to say, to fall in behind direct elections, say, okay, that's what we'll do. And we need the same commitment from direct election to say, if the minimalist model gets up, to make that same commitment. Okay, we trust the wisdom of Australian democracy and we move forward from there. I recently met with the President of Ireland, Professor Michael Higgins. What a fantastic man he is. What a great representative of Ireland he is. And I had a small epiphany, a small moment, a blinding flash, if you like, small flash, of understanding of that Irish way. Because there he was addressing an audience of 500 people in Sydney town, and it was impressive. There was a grandeur in the room. Why? Because the fine country of Ireland had sent this man across the seas as their best and their brightest, the representative of Ireland. And he stood there representing Ireland. When I meet with our Governor-General, who I really like and who is a very good man, and I wrote a piece in the paper the other day about what a great job he does. He really does. I was there at the centenary of the Battle of Le Hamel, 4th of July, there in France. Gee, he spoke well. Gee, he was fantastic among the people, among the descendants of the family. He's a great man. But Sir Peter Cosgrove represents fundamentally the Queen of England, and it's a different thing. When the Vice President of the United States visited Australia in February of last year, he sent out a tweet. I've just had a great afternoon. What a pleasure to be in Australia at Admiralty House, there with Queen Elizabeth II's representative to Australia, Sir Peter Cosgrove. And absolutely right in every particular. No factual errors whatsoever, but that's what he was doing. He was meeting with Queen Elizabeth II's representative to Australia. I mean, I die. I cringe at that, and we need to move on. But how do we move on? We need a critical mass. We need people to get involved. We need people to put their shoulder to the wheel. We need people to become members. We need you to talk about it. We need you to send money. We need you to send emails. We need you to Facebook upon it. We need to lift our profiles. We need you to email Australian Republic Movement, get the merchandise, get t-shirts, sweaters that say Australian Republic Movement, bumper stickers so that we lift our profile. And that when we go in, because if Labor wins, this could be on within a year. If the Libs win, we'll see what happens. If the Prime Minister wins an election, who knows which way it will go. The Prime Minister spoke to us on the 25th anniversary of the establishment of the Republic Movement, and between us, I mean, he spoke for 20 minutes, and in the first 5 minutes, he was so impassioned, so eloquent, so fantastic. Well, I said to my wife, I whispered to my wife, we're going to have to chisel this bloke's face on the western side of the Blue Mountains. He's the guy. He is the guy that is going to do this. Because in that first 5 minutes, he was just fantastic. The next 15 minutes was all the problems you Republicans will have. To which the answer was, what do you mean, you Republicans? What about us? What about we? What about, Malcolm Turnbull? You were at the barricades. You led us to the barricades in 1999. You're now the Prime Minister of the country. We need your shoulder to the wheel. And the Prime Minister's point is that he says we'll have to wait till the Queen dies. Now, there are two ways that I say that we can do this. One is, there are two ways we can do this. One is we can do this where the Queen is still young enough to come to Australia, and how wonderful it would be that she would come to the Opera House, let's say on a sparkling spring morning. And instead of we as a nation, us as a nation, one of those two, we, us, instead of us bowing, scraping, rolling on our tummy, hoping she'll tickle our, rolling on our back, hoping she'll tickle our tummy for us. Instead of that, as a people, we rise as one. We give her a thunderous standing ovation, and we say sincerely from the bottom of our heart, thank you, Your Majesty, for the sterling service you have rendered our nation. She hands us the keys. We start up the new constitution. We take it for a burn around the block. We say we'll buy it, and we give her a lift to the airport. Or we can do it the way the Prime Minister says, that we wait until the Queen passes away. And imagine the scene, 10 years from now, where the world has gathered at Westminster Abbey to farewell a great English monarch, seen off 13 Prime Ministers. By that time it may well be 18. We'll see what happens with Brexit. But there is the helicopters from CBS and NBC buzzing around, and there in the middle of proceedings, the cameras pan into the back of Westminster Abbey. It says somebody's coming in at the back, and somebody's coming out. Who's coming out at the back? Australia, right in the middle of it. You can see by the Akubra hat, the roll your own, the long dries a bone. And who's coming up the steps? Prince Charles, coming up the other way. Australia takes one look at Prince Charles and says, we've had your mother for 80 years. We're not going to cop you, mate, for 5 minutes. Quite seriously, is that fair to Prince Charles to visit that upon him? If we are going to do this, let us do this as grown-ups, as mature, to look Mum in the eye and say, Mum, we are moving out, and not wait until the funeral before we pack our bags. And on the angle, Uncle Bob, of Indigenous, you and I were talking earlier, the rights for Indigenous people, respect for Indigenous people, recognition of our strong Indigenous history. Another of the lines that I use, and I mean it passionately, is that when we become a republic, it will be an indication to the world and an indication to ourselves that Australia is not a nation with 100 years of history or 120 years of history. We haven't been here for 200 years or 250 years. Our people, we have been here for 60,000 years, and it will change the whole dynamic of the way that we look upon ourselves. To get to that point, I repeat, we need help. Your goodwill, your time on a Thursday morning is not enough. It's great that you've come, but we actually need your shoulder to the wheel. help us. Thank you. I look forward to the other panellists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And now we're moving quickly on. There will be time for questions when the panellists have all had their speak. I'm going to introduce all the panellists to you straight up, and then they will speak each for about 7 minutes, and then we'll open to full question and answers, so there'll be plenty of time for that. Starting over here, we have Dr. Tom Cochrane, who's from QUT. In fact, all these people here are lawyers or lawyers to be. So we're in a very legal framework here. He is a former Deputy Vice-Chancellor from QUT, and he's also very involved in open information and moving through his work in libraries and digitalisation and so on. Graham Moore is a constitutional lawyer, probably well known to you, from University of Queensland now, and he's well published. David Muir is a lawyer as well, but he's also here in his capacity as leader of the Real Republic, who are seeking a full democratisation of that, and also some other things in terms of reducing senators and so on, but I guess we won't go to that today. I don't know quite how we got the gender divide, it just happened. Ella Bugner is here. She's the Queensland Women Convener Women's Convener of the Australian Republican Movement. She's a law student and law student at UQ. So she's also looking at it through a legal framework. And last but not least is Heron Le Bon. She's a very proud Indigenous woman from Torres Strait, and she's a lawyer also, specialising particularly in Indigenous issues, but consumer law and other practices, and she's working out of Griffith. So we're very well covered. So without further ado, I'd like to call on David Muir to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and Bob, ladies and gentlemen. I've got a lot of faith in Queenslanders, and the reason I'm here today is because during 98 and 99, former Lord Mayor of Brisbane, Clem Jones, invited me to be on his ticket for the Constitutional Convention 98. I remember when Clem rang me at home saying, "Clem, will this take much time?" "Oh, not at all, Dad, not at all." I went into work the next morning and spoke to a young fellow called Michael Lavarch. And I said, "Michael, Clem's asked me to be on his ticket for the convention." Lavarch said a few expletives, and he was the head of ARM in Queensland at the time, and I was number 2 on Clem's ticket with Anne Burnell, the former Deputy Mayor of Townsville, number 3. The ARM and Clem's ticket each were successful in having 3 candidates elected to the convention. What happened in 99, I just want to allay one fear. I think Queenslanders are much less conservative and much more avant-garde than a lot of people give credit for. The reason why the vote was so low in Queensland at the referendum in 99 was because Clem ran, and we assisted Clem in doing that, a very strong no campaign. And Clem's name resonates in Queensland even today. As somebody, as a man of the people who could see that we've been sold a pup with the model. And so for those that think that the vote was so low in Queensland in 99, don't be despondent about that. There are a lot of Republicans in Queensland who voted no. So I just leave that thought with you. The other thing I should mention to you is a key element of trust that there's declined between our politicians and our people have declined. There was a level of distrust in 99, and that was the reason why saying no to the Politicians' Republic resonated so strongly, because there was a level of distrust. They didn't want the politicians appointing their head of state. They wanted to appoint their head of state. And you go west of the Great Dividing Range here in Queensland, I tell you what, there's a lot of monarchists out there. When it comes up to a choice, they will want to have a hand in who their head of state will be. They won't trust somebody in Canberra to do the job. So that's really important. Now, so what we can do as Republicans, we can contribute to rebuilding trust into the political system of this country. And I think that that's absolutely crucial. I was at Government House last night, the Function Australasian Study Parliament Group are having a national conference next door. And Paul de Jersey in his speech was talking about that decline in trust that's become endemic. And the trouble is, when our political leaders are part of this decline in trust, it then spreads throughout society. I mean, even into cricket, into business, academia, nobody trusts anybody anymore, and that's just not good for us. So I see the Republic debate is a way in to build trust. And part of the trust is to say we trust our Australian people to elect directly a head of state. That's a key trust value. For those that oppose direct election, one of the problems that one gets from that position is that what they're really saying, we don't trust you. We don't trust you to elect our head of state. And so that's why I just want to focus on the trust issue. Now, reviving the Republic, quite frankly, I think Queensland will lead the charge in this Republic debate. Queensland's led the charge on many debates. Queensland was one of the first states in the world to abolish the death penalty in 1922. Queensland had a big part through Samuel Griffith and others in actually writing our constitution. So Queensland have got a history of being at the vanguard. TJ Ryan, I mean, the man, he was born in Port Fairy, Victoria, died in Barcaldine, my hometown as it turns out. But TJ Ryan brought into our political system the sense of value. And so that's what we need to do. We need to build the sense of value back in. We need to build a level of trust. And part of that is an accountability. We need to be accountable each to the other for what we do and what we say. So Bill Shorten, as Peter's mentioned, has put, for the first time in 20 years, we've got a national political leader who's put the Republic back on the agenda. No Australian political leader has done that for 20 years. So that's the reason why we're now in a situation where we can actually now get some traction and engage people. But it's really, really important that we engage people in the regions of Australia. And we had a soft launch a couple of months ago in Townsville of our national campaign. And I can tell you what, the people in the regional Australia, they won't cop this just symbolic change, this minimalist change, they won't cop it. They say, we had that debate in 99 and it was done and dusted in 99. We want some value. We want to know if we're in Townsville, we're in Longridge, we're in Port Fairy, we want to know that what you've got on offer is something that's going to be meaningful, something that's actually going to be a change. We want to change. Our political system, well, Peter made reference to that argument about being broke. Well, quite frankly, I think it is broke. But also, more importantly, it's like Cobb and Co coach. It wasn't broke in the early 1900s, but we moved on. We've got other forms of transportation. So we need a modern vehicle to transport our nation in the global world. When you talk about a republic, you must be talking about constitutional reform, because by definition that's what it is. We actually have to change our constitution by referendum. So constitutional reform gives us an opportunity to make some meaningful changes. Now, one of the things, and Bob, this is really important, is that we need Indigenous recognition in our constitution. And we can't be serious to think that we're going to change our national identity without recognising our Indigenous heritage. How can you do that? It's part of the identity. It's what we are. So we must incorporate Indigenous recognition in our constitution at the same time. Otherwise, we're not fair income, and quite frankly, people won't trust us. Having a directly elected head of state is really important for a whole host of reasons. One is that it says to the people, we trust you. But also what it does is engages people, because people in Townsville or Longridge or whatever will say, well, if we've got no participation in this, why bother? And as Peter and others have said today, there's a level of disengagement with our political process. People don't want to, because they don't want to, because they said, well, if I put my hand up, nobody's going to listen to me anyway. And so you've got to find a way to bring Australian people with you. And it's all about the model. And that's the reason why the Republic failed in 1999, not because Australia is not a majority of people who are Republicans, it's because the wrong model was on offer. It was a shocking model. It was a model where ultimately it was a rubber stamp, joint sittings of Parliament, the Prime Minister go lead opposition, hey mate, secret shortlist has come to us, don't like that, how about this person over there, bang, joint sittings, deal done. Firing, Prime Minister at will, could bring up the head of state, hey mate, don't like you anymore, you're gone, no notice, no grounds, bang, endorsed by Parliament later, but that was the process, that was the model. I mean, how the hell, I mean, quite frankly, you know, the Prime Minister can't even sack their own chauffeur like that. So the whole thing was wrong in terms of the flawed model. So in terms of other constitutional recognition, we've put into the public forum that we need to make some changes to our Senate. Because you might remember that when we now have 12 senators in each state.
1 minute.
Sorry?
1 minute.
Oh, gee whiz. Okay.
Tell us your model.
So our direct election model incorporates a president who will be responsible for the fourth arm of government, integrity. So this person, rather than Caesar judging Caesar, this person will be responsible for the appointment of the anti-corruption bodies around the country. At the moment, our executives do that. Caesar judging Caesar.
How appointed?
And so they'll be appointed by the head of state. So that's a key feature of building integrity back into our political system. At the moment, executives will change the rules about, I mean, we don't even have a federal anti-corruption body. What's that mean? No corruption in federal politics, that's ridiculous. So we need to build this integrity into our system. And so the model involves direct election, and Gough Whitlam wrote a letter to Peter Beattie some years ago where he was opposing us back in '98. Gough Whitlam said, we will never get a republic in this country without direct election. They were the words of a former Prime Minister who was bitterly opposed to direct election at the time, who changed his mind, wrote to Peter Beattie and said, you were right, I was wrong. Gough Whitlam said that. I was wrong. And the only way that this will ever get up is with direct election. So what that means, as Peter was indicating, you have the severance question, you need the model question, and in terms of what Peter was saying, you will have a situation where the Republicans will be united by the answers to those plebiscites. So the plebiscites on the model, together with the severance question, will unite people on the Republicans. So you won't have that split as we had in '99. So that's the key. We must allow the Australian people to choose the model. So that's an incredible trust quotient. We trust you, Australian people, to choose the model, and we trust you to if the answer is yes, we trust you to elect your president, and it could be Governor General. It's a Republican term, easy with that. A lot of people want the Commonwealth of Australia to remain as a term. That's fine. It's a Republican term anyway. So there are some things we can hold on to, like the Governor General as a title. We can hold on to the Commonwealth of Australia rather than the Republic of Australia if people feel wedded to those concepts.
And how elected are they?
So the election process will be direct election, similar to the Republic of Ireland model. And I plan to spend some time over there next year talking to the President and others to get more sense of how it actually works, because it does work well. It's Republic of Ireland is elevated on the world stage by the fact that they've got a head of state who's elected by the people. And so that's a good model. It's a Westminster system, like us, Prime Minister, Cabinet, run the government, direct elected Governor General or President, carries out the ceremonial functions. We had the superadded function of the fourth arm of government, integrity. So we say powers of the Governor General plus the responsibility for integrity. So that is the duty statement. You have a nominations committee, and I think I'll be giving it away winding up. But it's important to understand that it's all about constitutional reform. And we need constitutional reform. We need reform that will add value to our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Lots of questions. I'd now like to welcome Dr. Heron O'Brien to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you. That 7 minutes really gets away from you, doesn't it? So I'll be keeping an eye. And firstly, I'd like to also acknowledge Bob Anderson, the traditional owners of the land on which we're having this meeting today. As Mary mentioned, I'm Torres Strait Islander, so I'm very much aware that basically anywhere on the mainland where I am, I'm on Aboriginal country, so I'd like to acknowledge that. So, being that I'm a Torres Strait Islander, I generally feel more comfortable talking sort of from my perspective and talking about the Torres Strait, so I'm going to sort of be a little bit more focused in talking about that. But of course, we have common experiences with our Aboriginal brothers and sisters as well. So, hopefully you can get some broader meaning from my 7-minute talk today. Okay, well I did take a lot of heart from what David said about looking at this as an opportunity for constitutional change for the recognition of Indigenous people. And so I too wanted to take this opportunity to say that I also think this provides an opportunity to recognise but also to reinstate the autonomy and the agency of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Because from my point of view, where there is agency and autonomy, there is success. Now, this isn't unheard of in the Torres Strait, and I wanted to use a little bit of an example to illustrate to you how this has brought about success for us in the Torres Strait. So in 1978, the Australian government signed the Torres Strait Treaty with the Papua New Guinea government. It became an independent state. Now, Torres Strait Islanders were a part of the negotiations within that Torres Strait Treaty in terms of what were our perspectives and what did we want to see out of this international agreement. Now, out of that, this treaty was attached to some legislation. So I am a lawyer, so it's a bit of a default position, but into the Torres Strait Fisheries Act, another Commonwealth piece of legislation which came into force in 1995. Now, the relevance of why I'm bringing this sort of legislation to your attention is that there's a protected zone joint authority in the Torres Strait. And it governs the fisheries, which are a very valuable resource in the Torres Strait, worth tens of millions of dollars. And at that table, under current Commonwealth legislation, sit the Commonwealth Minister for Fisheries, the Queensland Minister for Fisheries, and the chairperson of the Torres Strait Regional Authority, an elected person of Torres Strait Islander descent by Torres Strait Islanders. So I think what I'm trying to say is that some of these steps that we're looking to around autonomy and agency have been in place for many decades, and any fears which sort of people refer to about being scared, they're unfounded. We've sort of trodden over this space somewhat already. Now, the other example that I wanted to bring to your attention is in 1996, the Minister for Torres Strait Islander Affairs, Senator John Heron, no relation, I'm not named after him. In the Torres Strait, we have the same name, we say Nuss, so he's my Nuss, but anyway, might be stretching a bit there. But they actually, he actually ordered a report into greater autonomy for Torres Strait Islanders in the Torres Strait. It was called Torres Strait Islanders, A New Deal, a report on greater autonomy for Torres Strait Islanders. And it was tabled in the Commonwealth Parliament on the 26th of August in 1997. Now, importantly, the Commonwealth Government at that time recognised the distinct identity of Torres Strait Islanders, our enduring pride in culture and the strength of family life in the Torres Strait Islands. They supported and understood our aspirations for greater control over government service delivery in the region. And they legislated for us to have control for budgetary allocation and also administration under Commonwealth legislation. At the same time, they recognised that we were disadvantaged compared to the rest of the wider Australian community in areas such as housing, employment, health and education. And that part of this change and part of the autonomy move was to address this severe socio-economic disadvantage, including improving and closing the gap on health and education and other related infrastructure. So when I'm talking about autonomy and agency and bringing those two quite old examples to you, which continue through today, it's a process much like the Republic process that results are not delivered overnight. It would be unfair to expect this. and to adopt and use a well-known legal turn of phrase from Mabo and the State of Queensland High Court's decision, the tide of history has washed away our agency, and frankly, we want it back. Not with conditions, not with a lecture, not with 80% of our Centrelink payments loaded onto a plastic card for use only at approved retail outlets. We want it in its entirety. So from my point of view, if the government is serious about improving the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, closing the gap, and I think saving a bit of money along the way, autonomy and agency deliver on these. But for this to happen, the law, including the Constitution, which is a law, that gives authority to this must change. So one can cling on to the vestiges of history, which patronise and control Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people at great human and financial cost, or we can make good on the autonomy that we did have hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, and we do as any other Australian would expect. Now, we don't want what the government, and excuse my language, to pay lip service to the desire to improve the lives of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and children. We do not want a political will that is weak. We want meaning and strength in the words, policies and laws of our governments that are declared in our name. Now, the Republic movement and the Australian people's understanding of Republic may just be the opportunity that we need for the government and for all Australians to understand what it is to want autonomy, to want agency, and to be the final decision maker in your own country. We're not children who cannot make decisions for ourselves. We do not need someone to tell us we have done good or we have done bad. Now, I'm not declaring I am pro-Republic, but I'm not saying I'm anti-Republic either. I didn't write that, but I thought better say that. But I do understand the desire for a country to make its own decisions in finality, without the hand of another hovering above to swat down decisions that it deems unsatisfactory. Now, Torres Strait Islanders, as I mentioned very briefly in the Torres Strait, we do have more autonomy and more agency than many of our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. We have it in law, we have it in policy, and it is has been shown to pay social, economic and cultural dividends. But we are still chasing equality, and we can only hope that the Republican movement can link arms with us and bring us beside and not leave us behind, as we are all Australians. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's it.
That's fantastic. I'd now like to call on my colleague Tom Cochrane, who's also on the board of the TJ Ryan Foundation, to speak with us.
Thank you, Mary, for mentioning the Ryan Foundation. I have a slight disclaimer. I'm not a lawyer, or I'm an adjunct. My background is historical studies and lots of admin. A year ago, Malcolm Turnbull travelled to London to see the Queen, as we were reminded of before, and it is pretty much exactly a year ago. And there he announced, although being a Republican, he is also an Elizabethan. Although this pronouncement is not as strange and bizarre as the news of his predecessor's action some years before in conferring a knighthood on Elizabeth's husband, after all it makes the same shocking sense of being both demeaning and obsequious at the same time, Turnbull's comment is nevertheless, and however naively, an unhelpfully concocted paradox. For what it does is to conflate the notion that the acceptability of the monarchy is linked to the identity and likability of the individual on the throne. And my remarks here are going to link to the ones that were made in the later part of Peter's remarks. And in doing so, to de-link and distract from the real issue, which is, of course, whether Australia should continue to have, as its head of state, the head of state monarch. It reminds one of another confusion of personality and office, you know, the one about whether some aspect of the Prince of Wales' sex life should determine the future of Australia's constitution. The thing is, this conflation of person and the institution this becoming affectionately disposed to whichever representative of the dynasty an Australian is visiting or who may be making a visit here is not new. There's an excellent example from this place 100 years ago, Brisbane, Queensland, in the time of T.J. Ryan, and there's a continuing pattern thereafter. And I want to describe it to you because I think it illustrates a tactical dilemma that the ARM must understand and address to enhance success this time around. For those who may be hazy, Ryan was the extraordinary leader of Queensland from 1915 to 1919. He and his immediate successor, E.G. Theodore, led a wave of reform, including the abolition of capital punishment, as previously mentioned. And that was half a century before Victoria, I might point out. The establishment of arbitration and conciliation, actions intended to reduce the power of monopolies, legal and social reform, particularly in relation to access by women to juries, jury service, divorce proceedings and so on. In addition, there are a major range of actions designed to enhance economic equality in a range of ways and with varying effectiveness. I might add, parenthetically, that Ryan, while Premier, twice took cases to the Privy Council, being a lawyer, and he did that on appeal from the Australian High Court, and he won. And in that sense, the judicial relationship with Britain at that time worked in favour of reform. And this has some parallel to some of the discussion within New Zealand about what the Maori position might be on a republic in New Zealand, because the treaty, the 1841 treaty, offers some assurances to the Maori that are of course lacking in the Australian context. Ryan, to my knowledge, never aimed for a change, at least publicly, a change in the constitution in that sense. But that's not the point I want to make here. The issue for which Ryan and his colleagues were best known nationally was his oppositional stand on conscription in the Great War. And although Ryan was, along with all politicians of the time, apparently committed to the war, his stance on conscription shot into national prominence as the only premier to take on the Prime Minister through the two conscription referenda. We need to remember that this occurred against a backdrop of shocking loss of life, limb and mind, deep and worsening domestic tensions in Australia, and the ready claim of a wide coalition of conservative and even moderate forces that such a stance by T.J. Ryan meant disloyalty with a capital D. And where disloyalty festers, might a republic not be far behind. The establishment, meaning then a coalition of landed interests in the state, also the London pastoral lobby and the upholders of empire, became extremely nervous about Queensland and its commitment to change. The place was often referred to as a Bolshevik corner of the British Empire. What then has this to do with the monarchy and the republic? In the months and the years immediately following the Great War, there were those on the conservative side who came to the view that the vigorous reformist and rebellious impulses in Australia, most clearly manifest here, needed to be contained. And an important part of that containment needed to be a strategy centred on the sometimes worryingly capable leadership, in the case of this state, personified by those two giants of politics of the day, Ryan and Theodore. Not for the first time, and certainly not for the last, the notion of a royal tour to increase and promote sentiments of loyalty to Britain and to the Crown came into play. In 1920, the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VIII, visited Australia and spent significant time in Queensland, where such diversions as a kangaroo shoot on the Darling Downs were organised for by one of the local gentry. At the time that the Prince was in Brisbane and other parts of the state, the acting Premier was a man called Jack Feely, because actually the Premier was in London trying to raise money for infrastructure. That wasn't the word that was used in those days, but that's what it was. Jack Feely was distinguished as probably the most Irish and, in some eyes, one of the more uncouth members of the Queensland Cabinet. But we read, so great was the acting Premier's enthusiasm for the Prince that he even went to the trouble of flying to Glen Innes to say goodbye to him, having missed the farewell in Brisbane. A cartoon appeared in the daily afternoon newspaper in Brisbane at that time, which was a paper called the Daily Standard, which had the image of a figure prone in bed, unwell, with a banner around the head saying Australia. This person was recovering from a new and hitherto unknown malady called Prince-itis. The use of the royal tour as a deliberate strategy for the containment of reform has been the subject of other reviews and other literature. Churchill, in his last period as Prime Minister, was very keen to promote the importance of a very ambitious world tour for the new Queen in the early 1950s. And of course, we remember that and her arrival in Australia and the tour at that time. And it's here that I want to make some personal observations. I've noticed a tendency among people who would otherwise regard themselves as perfectly rational, free-thinking people to go to water a little when it comes to the royals. I was personally astounded with the number of people who tuned in to watch Diana and Charles take each other's vows in 1981. There was even a royal wedding recently that surprising number of people I know took in. But this notion that folk who would otherwise reject the legacy of any notion of inherited rights to power to nevertheless show extraordinary personal interest in the doings of the British royals is not a new phenomenon. And though it might be humorous and even diverting and entertaining to think of the way in which the personalisation of the royals attracts interest in the way I've described, we might also be wary of the ease with which that occurs. And more importantly, I couldn't agree with Peter Moore about this notion of waiting for Charles. This wariness should comprehend the extent to which it may be an underestimated or misunderstood phenomenon as Australians in future to go about the repeat and serious business of considering once more the need to move on from our time of accepting as our head of state the King or Queen of England. Thank you.
Another perfect score there. I'd like to call on Graham Orr now, Dr. Graham Orr. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you all for coming. I know you only came here to be entertained by Peter, as I was. I can only disagree with two things you said, and that each one is I'm a direct collectionist, although not as dyed-in-the-wool as David. The other is that the anthem should be My Island Home, preferably the Rocky Band, or Christina Lewis, a very good version of it. Although, whenever I listen to it, I'm reminded that it is a song, an anthem that's largely about the saltwater people and is less kind to the desert or bush people. But Australia very much is a coastal nation. I also wanted to acknowledge and thank Bob for his remarks. I've been very privileged this year. We've acquired a little 5-row cottage at Gumpi, or Dunwich, only a few blocks from 1 mile. And speaking to particularly elders like Barney Delaney and Andy Evelyn, I'm reminded of my privilege both in terms of being able to acquire a cottage on the island, but also, more specifically, that academic life, campuses like these, are very abstracted places. And some of Heron's remarks, but also David's remarks about not just the principled and big question of the symbolics of a head of state, but really the questions on the ground about constitutional legal reform are in many ways more important. That said, I'm not a constitutional lawyer really, I did the law of politics. So I'm going to stick to my knitting today, and I'm just going to talk about, very briefly, 6 issues in relation to election model that Peter was telling me about. So I've got a handout here. There'll be no exam questions. I didn't run on enough copies, so only take one if you're really a nerd and want to see what I have to say about some of these details. But to date, the focus of the debate has really been on whether we'll have an Australian head of state, and particularly so the big question of powers and role, or whether other substantive reform that might go along with that. I just wanted to speak a bit about the issues that may have to be looked at in terms of crafting an elective system for an Australian head of state. There are devils in the detail, but also some delights and challenges. Of course, we're not alone in such an enterprise. David said we could look to Ireland and borrow its model. There's also Austria, Iceland, Finland. They all have prime ministers and cabinets derived from Parliament, as well as an elected head of state with fairly limited powers. This is what the theoreticians call the semi-presidential system, in particular so-called premier or prime minister in presidential time, where you have a prime minister or premier who remains ultimately accountable to Parliament. But it is also, we can look overseas, but it's also a task for us uniquely, because Australia has some special characteristics in this regard. Most obviously our geographic size, our Indigenous history, our tradition of compulsory voting, also the fact that we have a federal Senate that is there as a check and balance. Isn't there in countries like Finland and Iceland, for example. The 6 issues I've listed that need to be pondered are, first, the timing and length of term. Now, many countries have a 5 or 6 year fixed term for their elected head of state. We don't have fixed national parliaments, so we couldn't really have head of state elect them the same day as a national election, which would be a snap election, unless we fix parliamentary terms. The downside of that is it's going to cost more. The upside is that you've probably depoliticised the campaign or the contest a bit more if the president is elected on a different day from a general election. We also have compulsory voting. If we're going to have compulsory voting for the head of state, then you need to have a vibrant contest. So you have to be careful that if you try and squash campaigning too much by having very low expenditure limits or just having a text-based booklet or something, you can compel people to turn out to make a decision about personalities and people that they may not be terribly au fait with, without the usual partisan cues that come along with voting in general elections. Second issue is, well, who can stand? And that's a big one, obviously, and there have been many proposals put forward. I guess the idea is you want to keep the ballot manageable, and some people want to keep the nominees respectable, particularly if the nominee's president is going to have certain integrity and oversight roles. Presumably, we do want to get away from the existing system where invariably you have to be an ex-legal or military figure to become Governor General. So, the suggestion I make, well, obviously you need some ballot filter. If you just had totally open democratic nominations where any elected could stand, you would attract a lot of look-at-me candidates, especially if there's public funding or reimbursement of campaign costs or a public platform for speech. You couldn't just have a high monetary deposit, that would be oligarchical. You could say you have to get 50,000 petitioners, that's an option. But without spending controls, a Clive Palmer would just come along and pay a logistics company to collect 50,000 signatures. Seems to me the best alternative may be to have an inclusive public committee that would invite nominations and would anoint 3 nominations of respectable people, but you would also allow outsiders to get on the ballot with a very high petition level. Thirdly is the voting system. I presume we'd stick to compelling people to turn out, but we wouldn't have to if it wasn't on general election day. But the less powerful the presidential role, the less justification there may be to have compulsory turnout. What about the options of filling out the ballot? Preferential voting is actually used in the Irish system for electing the president, and preferential voting is well understood in Australia. I think it works in our party system. People know how to rank 1, 2, 3, 4, just as they know how to go into a shop and say, if I can't get Coca-Cola, can I have Dr. Pepper? I think you'd want preferences to be optional, especially if the system is meant to avoid party line candidates. The aim would be to have several distinctive candidates, hopefully, on the ballot, some of whom voters would not want to rank 3 or 4 because, if nothing else, they may not know too much about them, particularly if there aren't party cues. Fourthly, big question, money, parties and campaigns. Most people seem to want to keep parties out. It's a very hard thing to do and mandate in law. It's really a suck it and see cultural matter. And when you look at some of the overseas experiences, you have circumstances where parties are involved, but it's a negative. Or you have circumstances where parties can be involved, but they choose not to be involved. Or you have circumstances, including in Ireland, where parties get involved, but it's not as rancorous as you think. If party support proves to be negative, and I suspect it may be in the current climate, the parties will avoid, at least overtly, campaigning for candidates. Secondly is money, and that's the $64,000, or in fact way more, question. Within reason, you can set limits on expenditure, but these were going to be perfectly enforced, especially in the social media age. You could even aim for full modesty and ban all paid advertising, though you'd have to have a constitutional amendment to protect that from the High Court's meddling. Banning all paid advertising is obviously an option, but it would accentuate the advantage of candidates who are already well connected in the press or already have very existing high profiles. It would also make it hard in a country with segmented media markets for some electors to get the information they need. Fifthly, a morbid question, what about midterm vacancies, particularly through illness and death? In powerful executive head of state roles, like in the United States, you just have a vice president, or you have a lineage, Speaker of the House, President of the Senate, and so on, to act as an automatic replacement. Assuming a relatively weak Australian head of state, I guess you could simply count back the votes from the last election, or you could have the remnant of the term fall into the longest-serving state government who is willing to take on this role. Finally, I do advocate, if not super passionately, for an elected head of state on democratic grounds, also given the zeitgeist of the time and the interest of people in having more voting opportunities, and we saw that, I think, in the marriage equality plebiscite. Happily for my position, I think, as many people acknowledge, the elected principle is popular and may be more likely to get the Republic off the ground, at least in the next century. But what does it mean to say I support election on democratic grounds? It's not all sugar and light. The principle of popular sovereignty is not all sugar and light. On the darker side, it means accepting that your law cannot hermetically control the process. Some nutters, some celebrities, and some parties will get involved. I don't really think about the royal family. There are some nutters and some celebrities involved in that process. So crafting any election model is going to involve some suspensee, some fear and apprehension about how it will work out. This leads to the sixth and final design issue on my handout. Who gets to set the rules? You'd have to set certain basic key rules like the tenure of the head of state in the Constitution itself. But I think you need to leave the rest of it to Parliament. That may sound counterintuitive. It's like leading, apologies to politicians, but leading the children in charge of the lolly shop. Won't self-interested governments just rig the system? There are two responses to that fear. The first thing is, by and large, the risk is low if the Senate plays its role and the House will review. Secondly, above all, as a Section 44 circus, dual citizenship circus of the past year has shown, you do need flexibility. If you lock too many things into the Constitution, things can't evolve, and particularly you get one generation, maybe our generation, if we're lucky, imposing its views on all future plans. Thanks.
The Queensland Women's Convener for Australia, for the Australian Republican Movement, Ella Rubner. Thank you.
I guess I just wanted to start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present. By way of introduction, my name is Ella Rubner, as was just said, and I'm the Women's Convener of the Queensland branch of the Australian Republic Movement. I'm really humbled to speak here today, though I do have to say I feel slightly underqualified compared to everyone else who's spoken. I hope today that I can kind of present the mindset of youth with regards to this issue and kind of share my perspective as a young person as to why I think Australia becoming a republic is important for Australians and our future. So as most of you would know, in 1991 the establishment of the Australian Republic movement paved the way for the necessary progress of this great nation. Over a quarter of a century later, and a lot has changed in the world for Australia and for the movement itself. From a personal perspective, as has been said a couple of times now, I was 2 days old when the last referendum was held. So I guess you could say I don't really have any personal experience with that, so I kind of come to this issue with a bit of a fresh face. We now have an entire generation that has emerged who have not had the opportunity to have their voices heard on this particular subject. I know Australian youth want to be a part of positive change, and I guess enacting this change is my main motivation through both my role on the UQ Republic Club Executive and also through my role as Women's Convener. I guess substantial constitutional change like this will not occur without the engagement and support of youth, specifically that kind of 18 to 35-year-old age bracket. Including them in the decision-making of this nation is something that is really paramount. Unfortunately, youth are statistically less engaged in political issues when compared to other age brackets. When I ask young people whether they want Australia to become a republic, which I have done many times over the past couple of years that I've kind of been at university and have been able to have these discussions, I'm often met with answers such as there are more pressing issues, I don't know, and most frequently I don't care. That seems to be the most popular one. As part of the executive of the UQ Republic Club, we try to engage youth on this issue and highlight how important this issue actually is. I think too often youth can kind of get surrounded by that kind of thought that there's more pressing issues, and I do understand that, housing affordability, trying to pay bills, just in general your education, and I think it can, issues such as the Republic can get swamped underneath that, but really when youth are presented and become aware and presented with that information and it's at their disposal, I really know from personal experience that they want to see change, because a system that's based on birthright and elitism and inheritance and wealth, it just seems inherently un-Australian. They recognise then that we actually do have time for such an issue, because I guess if these values that we kind of hold dear to us, if they aren't reflected at the highest level, then it's hard for us to really say that they are our core values by my perspective. After all, we have built our nation on the foundations of these values such as fairness, equality and merit, all of which seem to sit, in my perspective, in the direct opposition to the foundations of the British monarchy. And yes, although it has been mentioned, although many young Australians, myself included, can agree that the anticipation of the fashion choices made by Meghan Markle at her wedding was of some interest, the royals, Meghan now included, can, in my point of view, really be placed in the same celebrity category as their A-list celebrity guests. I think that this very sentiment expresses the outdated positions of power that these royals hold here in Australia. Without a doubt, the royals are clearly nice people and definitely celebrities in their own right. However, the question for me is, should that give them the privilege of being our head of state? For me, that answer is clearly no. This isn't to undermine the role that the British royal family has played in Australia, but to say that while England will always view the royal family to be a cornerstone of their culture, I really don't think the same can be said for Australia. While the monarchy has benefited us in the past, I really think it now inhibits our progress on the global stage. This movement, for me, is really about national pride and independence, and it's time that we realise that to its full extent. And really the only way we can achieve this is through having an Australian head of state. At this point, I would also like to briefly touch on my portfolio as Women's Convener on the State Executive. As well as engaging youth, I'm also particularly passionate about women's involvement in this cause, because like youth, they currently are less engaged. We are currently in the process of organising an event with the National Women's Convener that I hope will attract some more particularly young women to this cause, because it's a cause that everyone should get behind. Yes, that's something I'm really passionate about. I guess to sum up, Australia is an immensely unique country. This uniqueness is the reason why campaigning to be an independent republic for me is so necessary. The reality is that unless our head of state is an Australian, they cannot possess nor can they fully articulate the distinctive nature of this great land. It's time that we celebrate our uniqueness. We no longer need the protection or guidance of Britain as we did at the time of colonisation over 200 years ago. We are a strong, developed, respected country who should be embracing our own Australian identity and values, as they will be the attributes which will progress us. And this also obviously includes Indigenous recognition for me. I think that's also a really important point. Becoming a republic will give the voice of Australia back to Australians, and I think that's really what this movement at its core is what it's about. And when you get rid of the politics around it and you really focus on what we're trying to achieve here, I think it's something that can unite Australians. And what I like about the Republic cause is that it is non-political. It's not about political parties. It's not about politics. It's about who we are as Australians and how we can come together. And I think when this does occur, and I hope it's in the near future, because I don't want there to be another generation who, 18 years in the future future has to stand up here and say that it still hasn't happened. And I think we can make it happen, and as it has been emphasised, it's really about those grassroots movements, like at universities, even at schools, really connecting with people from the whole community and really getting them excited and engaged on this topic, because it is something that people can get behind if they have the information. Because simply a lot of people don't know about it, or they don't really understand it, and you have a lot of those kind of barriers. But I really think we can work past those, and we can make a lot of progress in the next couple of years. I think when it eventually happens, we'll be a stronger, more connected country because of it, and I would love it to happen as soon as possible. But yeah, thank you for your time today, and I really enjoyed speaking to you.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure you agree we need many more young people like you. Now it's your chance to ask all the questions. Stephanie is somewhere, here she is, with the microphones and so on, and she's going to lead the question and answer section.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie Serhan. I've been part of the TJ Ryan Foundation since its launch over 4 years ago now. When I was 16, I was in year 12, and I had been chosen as one of the students to attend the National Schools Constitutional Convention. That was in 1999, the same year as we had the referendum. Unfortunately, I was 16 at the time, so I couldn't vote, but very passionate, sitting there in Old Parliament House debating the Constitution as well as whether Australia should become a republic. 19 years on, we're still talking about whether Australia should become a republic. I didn't think at that time that it would take us so long to, first of all, become a republic, but also to continue this conversation. However, I am happy and honoured to be here today with you, and I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we meet, and I pay my respects to those past and present. So, it was great to hear from everyone today. Thank you for the historical recount of what we have done in the past and how trailblazing Queensland also has been when it comes to reform. I just also wanted to take this opportunity to go that step further as to who could potentially be our head of state. I had this idea and I've floated it a few times and passed a few people, but I thought to myself, if we in Australia have accepted for hundreds of years, as Peter mentioned, the aristocrats of England to be our head of state, why not every single head of state from the time we become a republic be someone of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent?
As an Aboriginal woman, I would shudder at what mainstream might select for us. Sorry, I have to say that.
I thought if we're going ahead, and we are going ahead, it's not a matter of if we will become a republic anymore, it's a matter of when. But when that time comes, being from a migrant background, my parents are migrants to Australia, I personally would love to see that our future head of state be an Aboriginal or a Torres Strait Islander person. So, I'll leave you with that thought as well, but I'm going to open up to the floor for questions. What will happen, we unfortunately don't have a mic to come around to you, but what I will ask is that you pose your question to who you would like to answer, because we need them to come up to the lectern to actually answer. So if you can do that, I know it's going to be a bit of walking around, we'll get our steps up today, but it's important because we are wanting to keep track and video of what is being said. So if we have hands, I'll pick those. Please introduce yourself and ask the question of the person who you wish. So, do we have any questions? Uncle Bob.
Yes, the question of the Republic, how does it relate to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? If they're going into dialogue, it's essential, it's imperative that that happen. who do they have the discussion with? With the native title legislation, organisational structures give Aboriginal people the rights to conduct their own affairs. I belong to Quandamooka people. Our native title was recognised on the 4th of July 2011 when a representative from the government visited the area, and after listening submission, our native title was recognised. So what would the Republic, what would their interest be in relation to the rights of Indigenous people, and would the Republic, how they dialogue with our community, or would the public, or would the Republic be seen then, from my perspective, I asked the question, would they could be seen as another a reconstruction of a white mission manager and another white protector of Aboriginal. That's the reality we're going to face with. That's why I say we must have robust discussion. And part of that discussion could be a dialogue with the Quandamooka Community about the Aboriginal Corporation, which I belong, as a start to get some feeling and get a roll on. If you don't do that, you'll be seen then as I said, just another white mission manager or another white protector of Aborigines. And I grew up at East Brisbane, and my Aboriginal mother used to say to me, be home by dark, always be home by dark. And I learned later that there was a curfew law existed in Brisbane that blacks had to be out beyond the boundaries by dark, hence the 3 boundary streets. So all those things impacted on me in my lifetime. So if we're going to go ahead, we're going to go ahead together. And I'm pleased to see this beautiful young woman from the Torres Island. And Uncle Stevie Mann was a very good friend of mine. And it was Stevie Mann and I, when the Queen of England first visited Nedington, this is our native name for Brisbane, the first 2 people she met was Stevie and I. But then they came to see us, that's what we met. So all those things. And why I wanted to see the Queen of England, with her family, the royal family, what they've done to institutionalise Aboriginal people as a result of the infamous act that governed our lives in Queensland. Its formal title was the Restriction of the Sale of Opium and the Aboriginal Protection Act. Google it and you'll find out what it meant. You'll understand why my mum's being like that.
Can I suggest, in the words of Tony Jones, we take that as a brilliant comment.
Thank you.
Well, it's important that the Republican movement doesn't emerge as another bunch of white protectors and white missionaries.
Thank you.
It
Yes.
must be something.
Thank you, Uncle Bob. Questions? Yes.
Hello everyone, I'm Jan Hamill. I'm a descendant of the Gomeroi people of Pilliga Scrub of New South Wales. And I've got this suggestion that I'd like to make to Peter and to everybody here. And I'm really impatient for this, for the Republic. And I think our first strategy could be to focus on the racist flag as a means of easing in the entry of a republic, if we focused on that. And John Howard, some years ago, said that I love the Australian flag, it represents all of us. It doesn't, given our stats show that so many Australians were born overseas, but in their original home countries, they were violated, displaced, and had their land stolen under the Union Jack, under the boats that sailed around Union Jack. That was wonderful. Yes.
Can you come up to the lectern? Is that all right?
Thank you very much for the question. The difficulty we have is that it is all very well. I personally, as I mentioned, I'm very passionate about the flag. The political reality of us becoming a republic, we have to be careful. We have to not alienate the wider community by embracing different issues. The Australian Republic movement, I have very strong views on climate change. I have very strong views on the flag. I have very strong views on multiculturalism. As chair of the Republic movement, we need to broadly be a one-trick pony. Okay, so if we were to say tomorrow, down with the flag, the Australian Republic movement says down with the flag, we're going to change the flag, I think you would find that our polling numbers would drop 10 to 20% overnight. And that is the political reality. So we have to comport ourselves in a manner whereby we say we are for the Australian Republic. And that's pretty much all we're for. And we certainly, personally, absolutely, the Indigenous question is something I'm meeting with Senator Pat Dodson, who I really admire. I'll be meeting with him in late August or early September. I've already had discussions with him. And I think that perhaps is an exception. We'll see how to work that out, because they both in many ways speak to sovereignty. But it's something where we need to proceed carefully to not embrace many issues. We're for the Republic, and that's broadly, we've got to be careful of working our way to get to 51%. Thank you.
Okay, the next part of the question, or the point I'd like to make, is that, and this is a very serious one, and I don't suppose it relates all that much to flag, but Indigenous Australians were massacred and biologically altered by colonisation. And now very few people realise that. When you're taken from a Western diet, and I've got some pictures that can show that, Western diet, sitting out of your traditional diet out there in the river, fishing, hunting, etc. And then you are brought in and you're having all of the other things, it biologically alters you. And this is a bit like Hitler might have done. Surely you cannot biologically alter a race.
It was appalling, but it does not speak to the Republican issues before us right now. I can respectfully submit.
Okay, thanks. Put up with that.
Project?
I'd be interested in Peter's comment, and perhaps we're looking at a two-stage process. Is the political reality, which you're quite correctly identifying, and the politics of celebrity, which we've all been exposed to with royal weddings and stuff. Whether we go for that simple change, where we rely on the good sense, inverted commas, of the Prime Minister dealing with presumably the Leader of the Opposition in order to get the numbers, in the numbers that you talk about, as a first stage, and that you identify that as the way to get us to some form of republicanism, and then move on to deal with the horrors of the Australian Constitution, of which Republican issues are only one.
That's right.
Did you want to come in?
Oh, I just want to emphatically agree with the very last words you said, Roger. The issue is, one thing is a simple question. The other is really about governance and a whole lot of other issues. And if you put that on the table, there are several others, including the status of the states, the arrangements we have for government, and there's a question. They're really important questions, but they're much more complex.
So your point being that the question of whether we should be a republic is a dead simple one. The kind of republic we should be is a far more complex one.
And I emphatically want us to be a thoroughgoing republic, but I do think it necessarily must be a two-step question.
In terms of the process, I agree. You need the critical mass. You need to say, you need to have, if you think of the night of same-sex marriage passed, it was basically throughout the land euphoric. And I think that if we have the question of do you want Australia to be a republic and it passes, which I think it will pass with a thunderous majority, there will be euphoria throughout the land and there will be momentum. And I would think the way forward, although nothing is locked in, and it will be the government that takes over, be it Malcolm Turnbull's government or Bill Shorten's government or a government or another, that will decide the way it is done. I've had discussions with the Labor Party side of things, and that is, I can say broadly, I'm very impressed by how far their thinking is, you know, how deeply they've thought about this. But my view is it does need to be a two-stage process.
Did you have a question?
I was going to ask about the statesman that you just touched on. What role does republicanism play at state level? We've got state governors. I think David may have mentioned hearing from Paul of New Jersey quite recently. Will we have royally appointed state governors yet an elected governor general?
Graham, would you be able to respond?
Well,
I have heard you,
I'm
I
not-
have heard you talk about
I'm
upper
not
and lower housing.
assuming, and I don't spend a lot of time delving into the intricacies.
the question, please.
The question, I think, was what about state governors, given that they are appointed on the Premier's advice by Buckingham Palace, and someone mentioned Premier Bjelke Petersen's efforts to do certain things, and one thing he did do was without having a referendum, so that we couldn't not have a governor without having a referendum. And it would look obviously very odd if you had state governors still appointed from Buckingham Palace, but you know, I don't hire, right? There's no barrier to having an Australian republic, and it would obviously put pressure on the states to do certain things, to catch up, if you like. So it's a good question, but I think it's a secondary question in a way. I'm not sure state governors represent the nation, represent the state to other states, or let alone to the world, in the same way that a head of state, Queen or Governor General does. So that's probably why it's a question that doesn't come up very often on people's lips, but it is a constitutional question.
Anyone else wanted to add to that? Yes, go on.
Just a couple of things in relation to the state governors. None of the Republicans that I'm aware of are incorporating change necessarily there, but the states will, no doubt, once Australia becomes a republic, will be informed by that, and the concept would be that the governors could well fall under the auspices of the Australian head of state, and maybe then appointed by the Australian head of state as opposed to the Queen or the King. So I don't think...
Or is it a golden opportunity to get rid of state governors?
Well, it depends whether with the new model of the Republic, they could have a meaningful role or not. And that's the question which... I don't see that as... That's the answer to that question, I think, will fall out of once you become a Republic, and then you just work out... I think you deal with the Republic issue first from a federal point of view, and then you work out where the value lies after that. So I don't see that as a core position. In terms of what Peter said about the process, I agree that certainly it's more than one step, because clearly, as the opposition has outlined, he's wanting a plebiscite on the severance question. So that's a simple question about whether we should sever our links with the monarchy. The next question is then what kind of model. That ought to be put to a plebiscite either at the same time or another plebiscite before you go to the referendum. Because the referendum...
Three-tier, you want a three-stage
Yes,
process.
but it may well be that the two plebiscites can be done together. So you have the question yes, no to the severance, which is a simple question.
And may I take this opportunity to ask the question I referred to. If we go to the second stage and Australia has the debate, I absolutely commit, if minimalism does not get up direct election, I will put whatever weight I've got behind you.
Yes.
Will you do the same?
Well, I can say this. Best way of answering the question is that Clem Jones, he informs us in terms of his monetary resources. So he's given us up to $2 million to run a national campaign. But that is specifically for direct election. What I can say to you is that I can't spend Clem's money against his wishes, but I would think that most Republicans, including us, would say, well, the Australian people have spoken, this is the model they want, let's support it.
My friends, thanks for our time.
And can I also say, Peter, I think the monarchists will become our friends as well.
We have a question from a panelist.
No, just...
No? Did you want to add?
Don't spoil it. Don't spoil it.
No, the original question was about the states, and the other way to look at it is this: it could be a positive thing if the national debate doesn't get squashed again. The states have been incubators of reform on a whole lot of issues to do with democracy, particularly public funding and anti-corruption commissions and so on. A progressive state could easily change its constitution, in other states at least, to say we will have a direct election process for our governor, and suck it and see, work through some of the issues that Peter and people who might be afraid of election model might be concerned about, and that might provide a springboard at least for the next generation to come to the issue in a roundabout way.
We don't want to wait for the next generation, but it's
Yes, excellent point. Yes.
Can I ask a question, David, please?
David.
David, my name is Tony Moran, reporting for Fairfax. Under your model, how do you scrutinise the candidates so that, for example, the 2022 equivalent who won the block doesn't stand as an effective candidate or the equivalent of Clive Palmer or something like that? How do you see that?
Well, the Nominations Committee, can I say a couple of things about the Nominations Committee, because that's a key feature of a direct election model in particular, but all models. But the Nominations Committee could be, for instance, the governors of each of the states. They could be the Nominations Committee, then puts forward a list. At the convention in '98, there was much debate about what the Nominations Committee might look like. It was seen to be necessary to perhaps have some community representation there, community leaders with parliamentarians and with judges. So you've got the outcome of the Nominations Committee process would mean that you've got 3 to 5, say, very high calibre candidates. Any one out of 3 to 5 candidates could ably fulfil the function of head of state. So that is important, and the makeup of your Nominations Committee is obviously requires further debate and further discussion, and there's already been some debate and discussion about it. The concepts that I see falling out relate to, it could be, say, the governors, it could be what was discussed in '98, where we have representatives of community, our parliaments, and our judiciary, and that mix of people come together, and they then put forward the list and one of our presenters talked about, an Aboriginal state head of state. That'd be fantastic. But what I'd like to see is a Mary Robinson come out, and she might be an Indigenous Mary Robinson, but I'd love to see somebody of her calibre to represent our nation, and I think that's something that is more than likely under direct election.
You're broadly referring to what are you going to do to stop Shane Warne?
Yeah, exactly.
And it comes up a fair bit, and the answer is, and the other one is Donald Trump. That's the absolute truth. I trust Australian democracy. I don't think Australia will ever elect Shane Warne as our president. Not that there's anything wrong with Shane Warne. But people, it's interesting. Well, I do this on Twitter all the time, and people say, they throw out Clive Palmer and they throw out Shane Warne, and they say, to which I reply, oh really? What is it, mate? You can't trust your fellow Australians. You actually think we're going to do that? We're not going to do that. We're a wise people. We've got a long history of democracy. We've led the world in democracy, and we will come up with a very fine head of state. We can do this, because I always go back to people and say, really, you actually take the view that we're not capable of coming up with a fine Australia, therefore we need to hold England's hand. No. My message for what it's worth is, let us trust Australian democracy. We will come up with a fine person, be it by the minimalist model, be it by the direct election model, but we can do this on our own. And I might say one other thing that we struggle against is the myths, the things that people put up. I mean, how many times have people said, and they absolutely mean it, I want Australia to stay in the Commonwealth Games. And it's a really widespread view that if we, I pointed it out many, many times, but there are 52 nations in the Commonwealth, 37 of them are republics. They had CHOGM October, I think, 2016, held in Malta, am I right? Yeah. Which I think has been a fine republic for 40 years. And people, we need to, we've got social media people putting that out there, and things in the age of social media. My friend Ben Fordham made a very interesting point. He's on breakfast afternoon radio in Sydney on 2GB, and he's been on there for a while, and he said 2011, same-sex marriage, if it came up, people would just attack. And it's that kind of station. They would absolutely attack it. By 2013, people were talking about it, and by 2016, most people were saying, for God's sake, get on with it. And his point being that in the space of 5 years, with a deeply conservative audience, the game changed. And because I would say, and I say this as somebody who supported same-sex marriage, I would say that the internal logic of same-sex marriage on the grounds of equality was so strong that once Australia focused on it, it just all fell into place. And I suspect that once we come to whether or not we're being a republic. Australia's not concentrating on right now, as you mentioned, that your friends don't talk about it. The way I put it is 50% of the people are for us, 25% of the people are for the monarchy, and 25% don't care, so long as they can keep watching the Kardashians. And those are the broad figures. But I think that once it's on, once the referendum is on, once there is traction, once Australia focuses on this and says, do you really want to continue with this system? Whereby, the way that I put it is, I say, when I speak to older Australians, I talk about, look to your grandchildren. And I say, look at the photo of your family last Christmas, or Yom Kippur, wherever it was. There you were, 25 in front of you, in front of the barbecue. Now look at the photo of the Queen of England with her fine family on her balcony last June long weekend. Understand that under our current system, the youngest person on that balcony with the Queen of England, 2 weeks old, is automatically more qualified to be the head of state, Australian head of state, than anybody in your family. And your niece, Esmeralda, could win the Oscar by the age of 18. She could give us cure cancer by the age of 25. She could give us peace in the Middle East by the age of 35. Rid us of Pauline Hanson by the age of 40. She could do all these things. Be the most accomplished and revered Australian that ever lived. And under our constitution, she still would not be judged good enough to be the Australian head of state. And when we get to the campaign, when we can crystallise these options, I think it'll be like same-sex marriage. It will be remarkable how quickly things fall into place. But what we need is an infrastructure now to do the work now, to have our people in place, to have campaign funds, a campaign worked out, university clubs all over the country sorting it out. May I be excused, because I do have another commitment at the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take a vote.
Yes, there's the commitment. Direct election and minimalist. May the better side, whoever wins will back the other side home. Great moment for Australia.
Can I just add one other line to what Peter said? And don't forget that with direct elections, your constituency is the whole of the nation. So if you're worried about Shane Warne, realise it's not just one electorate, it's the entire nation. So just think about that. Thank you.
Yes, question here. Who's it to? And
my question is to David Marr. My name is Ken Barlow. I'm also a lawyer. And I'm also a university. I think Malcolm Turnbull was wrong in 1999 by saying John Howard broke Australia's heart. It was the differences of opinion between the Republicans who broke the referendum. And my concern about having a group called the Real Republic, who has a very legitimate point to make about a direct election, is going to lead to the same thing. Why is there a separate group rather than wanting to say within someone like the Australian Republic movement, we support a republic. We think the Australians should directly elect their head of state, but we want the Australians to decide that by, I would suggest, a two-step method. Do you want to have your own head of state? And at the same time, if so, if there were to be one, which would be the appropriate way to appoint one? Isn't that a problem from Republicans' general point of view, that there are now two groups that appear to be debating?
Well, Ken, there are many groups, but it's not a problem. It's all about getting the process right. The process was wrong in 98, 99. We need a unifying process. And it's good that there are different Republican groups out there around the country participating, because basically not everyone's got all the wisdom. And so, but you fix up the unity problem by unifying with your process. You have your severance question, you have the plebiscites on the model. The thing about it, as a Republican, there's no way in the world you can fulfil your dream of becoming a republic without consideration of the model. Every republic concept has a model, whether it be minimalist or direct election or whatever it might be explained. So you can't avoid that question, and it ought not to be avoided, because at the end of the day, when the rubber hits the road, we want a model here. We don't want, just a republic for the sake of a republic, which there's some good reasons why we might want to separate our links and all the rest of it. But we need to make sure we don't stuff this up. And if we have a situation where Prime Minister Turnbull, if he'd got his way in '99, he could wake up tomorrow and ring up the head of state and said, I don't like you anymore, you're gone. And that's rubbish. And we don't want to foist on our political system that we're trying to add value to, that we're trying to improve, something that's going to be so badly flawed as that. So you just can't let that go, because we can't stuff this up. Once that constitution's changed, as it must be to become a republic, it's set there. Not easy. You can't just go down the road and pass the bill. It requires a referendum. So you must understand the permanency of the change that you're making and the potential fallout of coming up with something flawed. So that's really, really important. But the unifying thing, it's all about the process. It doesn't matter whether there's 100 Republican groups in Australia. If they lock in behind the process of having the severance question, the model question, before you go to the referendum, we're together. And as I said before, I wasn't entirely flippant about the monarchists. There are a lot of monarchists out there who, once the monarchy is off the table, will support a republic. But my view, and the polls indicate, that the majority of those monarchists will support a direct election model as well, along with the rest of their country people. So it's just the process. Get the process right, and we'll get the result.
Thank you. Yeah, one more.
A point of information, people have claimed that James Cook claimed Australia under the Union Jack. He didn't. It didn't exist in 1770. If in 1801 the British can change their constitution to A, allow the Catholic Irish to be part of the kingdom, and change their flag in 1801, surely we can today.
Okay. Was there one more question? Well, we'll take two questions. Who's it to? And then we'll end with those last two questions.
Well, more generally, I suppose the question I was going to ask listening was that we seem to have a battle here between somebody who doesn't want to go into the details and another group that does. And I guess, unlike the same-sex marriage question, which is a yes-no question, to my mind, the question, the discussion this morning illustrates the point that it's an extraordinarily complex issue. So therefore, there's a kind of simplified, Peter's gone now, but there's a trust me view over there, and with no detail. And what happens next, question mark, is in the future, which potentially is as dangerous as the current situation we're trying to change. And the other side is, of course, that David's got the problem, I guess, of having a requirement to put a particular sort of view. I guess Clem's reign in Brisbane is an example of what could happen or can happen, good or bad. But the detail is actually, I think, fundamental to getting people to change. Now, it struck my mind that if you wanted to find out what people in Australia thought right now, you'd run a dial-in or a call-up or something and get people to nominate who they think would be a good person to be the head of Australia. That would give some fairly odd examples, I suppose, but it might bring Shane Warne to the top, just to use that example. Might even bring Peter to the top. Who knows? But I think it just seems to me that there's a kind of really interesting battle between doing detail that needs to be resolved sometime, and whether we'd be better off having it up front than not, given that there's a sense that Peter's sort of trying to run a simple, convince them, and then it'll be all right afterwards.
And although that's probably very divisive, which model do we go with, I want to come back to that. I think it's a consistent view in the room that we all agree that we should become a republic. So that first part, I think,
well, that's the first question, but the second question
yes.
is the one that I think is the problem lurking. It's the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Well, at least it unites us for now. One last question.
Someone wanted to answer.
Oh.
I just want to make a point.
Yep.
Take issue with the notion that there's hidden detail which isn't disclosed if we get to the first point. The whole point about the minimalist position, my understanding is, no, there isn't any further detail. It's just very simple. You don't get the head of state authorised by the British Crown. That's the only thing you're changing. And of course there are criticisms of that because it doesn't address a whole lot of things. But the point about the minimalist position is it goes no further than that. And so there isn't any detail that's being hidden away or not disclosed. Although even those who may oppose that might want to suggest to people in order to make them fearful that there is.
Can I just on that, Tom? There is a bit missing there. It's severance is great, but then who appoints the head of state? You've got to answer that.
Right, well, if it's a minimalist position, then it's the same process as the appointment of the government.
As we have it now.
Without the Queen.
Yes.
Yeah. One last question.
I've kind of gone slightly off topic, but it's to David Muir. It's about his newly created fourth arm of government and the oversight of the anti-corruption agencies. That's an alarmingly kind of radical suggestion that changes the nature of the Governor-General from a largely ceremonial position to one having oversight and oversight of politicians. I think that's kind of a strange track to go down and to tie into this campaign. Would you like to just talk about that for a second?
Well, I think that the ready answer to that is that in our discussions in regional Queensland, it's the integrity issue that's the big issue. It's the lack of trust of our political processes, the lack of faith in our politicians to manage corruption or to combat corruption. And so we see that as being something that excites people's attention. We talk about enlivening the discussion with the public. We need a way to communicate to get that engagement. And certainly our response in our public meetings that we had so far is that something that resonates. People set up as IK. So we understand, we are concerned about the fact that there's a lot of corruption in politics and it's getting worse and there's a lack of integrity. So anything that deals with that issue gets our attention. So part of the challenge for the move to become a republic is to actually capture the imagination of the country, because it's a second, third, fourth, fifth order issue at the moment. And not only do we capture attention with the integrity issue, but it actually does add value, because any study, and I also remember the Accountability Roundtable and Australasia study Palmer Group, and I know through their discussions, and it's a matter that was mentioned by the Governor of the function last night, is that the integrity issue is something which is really probably a number one issue in Australian politics at the moment, lack of trust. And so it deals with that. Takes out, the clerk of the Senate made a comment. Our present system is a bit like having the captain of the batting team in cricket analogy being the umpire. And that's what we got. So we need to deal with that, and that deals with that issue.
I don't think it deals with that issue. I think it's a terrible conflation of two issues.
No, that's fine. And we're democracy, we can have different opinions.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much to Stephanie Sahan, who's our former, TJ Ryan's former secretary, but who's gone off to the Just a quick aside, if integrity is really the key issue, how come we're having such trouble nationally getting up an National Integrity Commission?
Well, that's right. That just underlines my point.
Exactly. Okay, that brings us to the end of the question time. I'd now like to call on Michael Cooney, who is the convener nationally for the Australian Republican Movement, and seems all the Republicans have been in town this week. So thank you, Michael.
G'day. Yes, my name's Michael Cooney, so I'm the National Director of the ARM. I'm the sort of senior professional person who works in the organisation. Peter obviously is the chair. But I just wanted, this has been a super interesting conversation to witness and be listening to. I'm really glad we've had such diverse voices and such a diverse set of ideas and conversations. The Australian Monarchist League Victoria has a function today as well. They are, this is true, they are hosting a black tie dinner at the Melbourne Club in Melbourne to commemorate the Romanov family. They're having a Romanov dinner this night. The Russian imperial family ran an absolute autocracy deposed a century ago. So we are fortunate in our opponents, if nothing else. I mostly just want to offer some thanks and a few brief reflections. Thanks to the Queensland Republicans here and to Andrew Fraser especially for your work. This state's vital to any successful Australian campaign. Thanks to the TJ Ryan Foundation, especially to Stephanie, who was really the inspiration for us coming out here today. Over the summer of 2010-11, I read Dennis Murphy's biography of Ryan, and obviously Queenslanders probably don't need me to recapitulate the Ryan story for you. I'm sure you've had 1,000 visitors come up and tell you how great Ryan is. But you know, to me, his democratic and inclusive and patriotic identity is really very inspiring. And when you think to his premiership and his battles over the war economy and the way that Labor was being conscripted but Capital wasn't, and his attempts to maintain a free press, and those battles were with Hughes in the Prime Ministership, but also with his own upper house and with the Viceroy in quite interesting ways. He's a very inspiring figure to me, and his death is one of the great sliding doors in Australian history, really. Probably the worst thing that ever happened to the Labor Party. Uncle Bob, you gave such a wonderful reflection on shared place and identity, and it was really, thank you for welcoming me and us. It was really inspiring, very humbling. What you said about the Republic movement not being another group of life protectors, I really think is something I think about a lot. Peter did point out, it is true Peter isn't nearly as rough as he looks, and he's quite good at impersonating Peter Fitzsimons. But the best thing Peter does for us as a chair, apart from just being a famous person who talks about it, is the Peter fundraisers, and it's a campaign, and we're tremendously grateful for his leadership. David Muir, thank you. We agree on a number of things. I think the importance of trust and engagement that you pointed to. We both prefer an Australian Republic. I agree with David, both that Australians want to elect their president and that would be preferable. That's how I'll vote in that question. And that last point is the key, that we agree on giving Australians a say over how the president is chosen, or the head of state is chosen. That's a point that we agree on, and we can get on with campaigning to give Australians a vote to have a say about that question. We're happily past the people who need to warn each other that if we don't do that, it'll all go wrong. We agree. So let's go out and tell Australians that that's what we want and ask them to do it. My personal view is that people who will stop the Shane Warne candidate are the Australians who will vote and who are not idiots. Captain's calls go wrong more often than democratic processes, in my opinion. And when I think about the examples that are sometimes given, and they're not stupid examples, for Clive Palmer, he got a quarter of the vote in one electorate, in one election, and would never have been in Parliament except for a deal between parties. 75% of people, even in one seat in one state, did not want Clive Palmer. If the American people had been asked directly who they wanted to be the president, they wouldn't have had Donald Trump. It was precisely the mechanism imposed by 18th century elites to prevent the people from getting it wrong. Precisely that mechanism delivered the world Donald Trump. And it was the animal spirits of the people were putting up an apostle of reason, and it was the electoral knowledge that gave us mania. So I think that's a very important point to understand. It's certainly a good piece of politics to tell the people you trust them. But I actually think in a developed country with universal education and the prosperity that Australia has, it also frankly makes sense. And the people get it wrong much less often than 12 individuals in a room who think they know what they're talking about. Karen, thank you so much. I already thought it was such an interesting framework that you gave us. I think the point about autonomy and agency is so powerful. It's an interesting analogy between the two questions about Republic and Indigenous. And if I could summarise where the ARM is on this, we recently made a short submission to the Parliament, to the current Parliamentary Committee on the recognition and the constitutional change process. And basically we said, look, we support the Indigenous Constitution. We support the Indigenous campaign for a constitutional change, but we do it humbly, respectfully, committed to listen, to help when we're asked, but also to recognise when we're not. And not to speak over Indigenous voices, and not to have a view about how or when, or really we should be listening. And we just support a national vote on the date and in the form that Indigenous leadership and community wanted held, and that was our submission to the Parliament. And in many ways, I think that's as much as we should say. I just know it's certainly not for me to have a defining view except to say, yeah, let me know what the polling date is and I'll drive people to the booth. And I just like, we've said about link arms, walk alongside, not leave behind. I think that's really powerful. And thank you for your impatience too, I agree. I agree.
This is just that I would really like to see a republic before I'm in the ground.
Me too. Tom, thanks for speaking about Brian. I thought that I spoke to him before. those things are really fantastic. I think the best thing about Graham's survey of the issues is that they're frankly not that hard. You know, they need to work through. There are issues that, you know, but these are not unsolvable questions. The Irish presidency will be elected again this November. Ella, fantastic, thank you. We're so fortunate to have Ella on the campaign. The best thing I thought about Ella's remarks is really the perspective you were drawing from actual campaigns. So the motto of contemporary campaigning is never waste a conversation. And this is really important. It's usually taken to mean never miss an opportunity to persuade, which is important. But it's also never miss an opportunity to listen to what people are actually saying. And I think the perspectives you shared with us on the conversations you're having, particularly with women and young people, were just, you know, there's a lot of theorising about what the people might think going around. And I think that the point you're drawing from actually talking to people about it and asking them their view is incredibly important to us. So look, overall, there's been a lot of thoughtful points being made today, and I really appreciate thoughtfulness, and Republic supporters in general I find are good thinkers. I don't think you'd enjoy playing chess against a Republic supporter. I sort of picture a Republic supporter playing chess with their finger on the pawn for some time. You know? 2020 or 2021? Are we going to say independence, or are we going to say joy, equality? So look, thoughtfulness is really good, right? But there's a very famous Australian rules football coach in Melbourne, who wouldn't be as well known in Brisbane, John Kennedy, who famously said, "Don't think, do something," you know, to wake his players up. And the most important thing that we do is we gather email addresses of Republic supporters, and then we email those Republic supporters saying, here's something practical that you can take part in. So Andrew Fraser is standing at the
If I
back.
could just say, I'll be having sheets of paper here if anyone wants to.
So if you'd like to get emails from us, please let Andrew know. It's very easy to sign up for emails online. And something practical that we can do, like thank you for your time in being here today, but also on the 1st of September, Andrew and Ella and Martin and a couple of other people will be organising some barbecues and conversations with Australians on that Saturday. There's a national activation going on, so if you're really keen on the Republic, talk about the Republicans is really valuable, but also, and Jenny, but talking to other Australians is even more valuable. So if you'd love to put on a yellow t-shirt, put on a barbecue apron, flip a sausage and have a conversation about this, that would be incredibly helpful to and gratefully received. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for having me, Mary. We have enjoyed my visit to Brisbane this week. I'll see you soon. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Michael. Thanks to everybody for coming, and thank you again to the panel. And let's hope that the Republic is not another 18 years old, or as we would say, stand up and fight. So